Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another webinar, COVID-19, Maintaining Essential Waste Services, hosted by Suez. I'm Dr. Adam Reed, the External Affairs Director and your host for the next 59 minutes. This is, I can't even remember how many, I think it's number 6 on our series of webinars related to service provision, policy adaptation and frontline issues related to COVID. So welcome back, all of you, and the number is rapidly rising, so that's fantastic. So early on a Monday morning. Absolutely fantastic suite of speakers this morning, picking up some really key issues at this new phase of where we are with COVID. So can we switch on the next slide, please, Helen? So most of you will know there's been lots of guidance issued over the last couple of weeks. We are ourselves issued a document not that long ago looking at how you might reopen and when reopening would be appropriate. We've seen both Nordo and DEFRA issue paperwork looking at the issue of reopening. And then, of course, last week we saw the law change with regards a visit to the HWRC being a legally acceptable journey. And with that, we've seen a plethora of opportunity for reopening under different circumstances, different rules, different requirements, different material streams, different booking systems, and probably different operational experiences in the last week or two. So today, I have with me Stuart Hayward-Hyman from Suez, who'll be talking about what's going on more generally in the UK and how we're seeing this service provision map out. We've got David Taylor from Greater Manchester Combined Authority talking about what's happening in a very busy part of the world right now. Then we're going to move to Richard Parkinson into sleepy Surrey, where things are perhaps not quite as busy. And then finally, Dale Robotham from Stockton, who've been doing quite a bit of work over the last 2 weeks now in terms of service provision and operation. So lots to share. So for me, I'm just going to get things rolling. As per normal, top right-hand corner for most of you, there's an orange button. If you can't see it, that's your control panel. Flick on it. Please look down the list of options, and there's one called questions. You can type in your questions either for one speaker or all speakers, or for me if you wish, and I will make sure we get as many of those answered in the next 55 minutes as possible. If you don't, I will ask one of the 6 or 7 that I've already pre-prepared, a bit Paxman-like, I know, but they're there just in case you've got nothing interesting to test my panel with. And then finally, I have 6 poll questions. Now, those of you that have been on these calls before will know that Stuart and I are particularly keen in understanding how you, the audience, feel about the issues of today. So we usually write up a quick blog afterwards within the next 2-3 days where we'll share the headlines of those polls to see what the audience is thinking about the big issues of today. So bear with us. Please vote. It's a really simple click the right box, nothing difficult in there, and we won't attribute any answer to any one authority, so don't worry, it's anonymous. But we're always keen to hear about what's happening and what's shaping your decision making. So with no further ado, I suggest we move straight over to my good colleague, Stuart, who's going to give us a bit of an insight into what's happening in terms of service provision right now across the UK and where we can see developments going in the next few weeks. Stuart, welcome.
Thank you, Adam, and a marvellous Monday to all. So just going to quickly go through a few things. I think although we're going to focus on HWCs because they're the things that are changing most, I want to kind of put that into context a little bit. So I've stolen a little bit of information from various and disclosed some of the stuff that we've been doing in bringing that forward. So next slide, please. So this is ADEPT's last set of results. I've annotated them with the pink lines because I think it's just it's a key message over time that you know, everything's improving. HWRCs are the things that are struggled most, and we've seen the law change, which is one of those things that we certainly pointed out early on was an essential process to make it clear what we can and cannot do. So certainly green's good. Red's bad, if you want to look at it. I put the keys in this time. For those of you on the last webinar, we had a couple of questions going, what do the colours mean? So yeah, so green's good, red's not so good, grey, service suspension. So you can see generally all the services are moving towards operating in different standards. Some of them are still having some difficulties as we go through the process of getting our staff back and organised and how all our services operated. So it's good, it's not trouble-free. I think we've seen, certainly in the dry recycling market, some issues in the supply chain beyond the collection. So just starting to see a few stresses and strains in the system as we cope through, and obviously different volumes arising from household collections that are causing a few issues in terms of types of truck and volume of trucks. So we've seen a few collection rounds going to different collection trucks that allow a bit more efficiency. So next slide, please. I'm sure a big topic of today, but yes, HWRCs, they are opening. I think by the end of this week, the majority of the Suez operated sites will be open and running. Some good experience from those processes. I've stolen these from the site staff who've sent them down. I've enhanced them a little bit, and I've cut up a few number plates here and there, but fundamentally, good service. We've learned some good things about it in that process. Managed queues, understood what the service looks like, and generally I think we've had some really good feedback from the public in terms of A, that they're open, but B, some of the services. I think some of the Twitter feed we've had on the booking, which maybe we would have expected booking to be more problematic. Actually, some are going, great service, could we not have it in mainstream rather than just in the emergency times? So I think it's teaching us a few good things. So next slide, please. I think taking the feedback from all of our guys around all the sites of where we started from and something that we've learned, I think is communication is key to success. I think the more you can get the public on board, understand what they can and cannot do, what their limitations are, how to access the system that you're doing, then the more they know what they're doing, the less frustration they have, because frustration comes from not knowing what the answer is. So that's worked really, really well. And I think if anything, is the key unlocker, irrespective of the individual site's constraints that need to be worked on. I think common to all is good communication is key. And then I think my last slide. So we've looked at what's happening. We've looked at what we're opening, sort of the immediate stuff. We've started to look at by customer and customer segment, what does the recovery look like? So looking at what the financial forecasts are from the Bank of England to Ernst & Young and other financial analysts, look at individual sectors and then starting to work out what the recovery might look like, because obviously we're a service provider, so we need to match our services as Suez to our customer services as they go up. And obviously different sectors have started at different points. So I'll put an example of arts and entertainment and recreation, which is at a fairly torrid time through COVID, and is going to have a difficult recovery whilst we work out how to get people back into those facilities and accessing those services. And where you're dealing with the public, you have a very different options and constraints on what you can do in terms of how you manage them. Whereas manufacturing, you can see on the bottom graph, we expect to be probably recovered far quicker. It's had less impact because it's been able to, in many instances, operate through COVID, maybe in a less than optimal way, but certainly continue to operate. So certainly now the big focus for us is to look at, how do we tune our services as a company to our customers. I think that's me done.
Thank you, Stuart. Whilst Helen's putting the slides on to David's, quick question for you. Anonymous, did Suez follow the Veolia guide on how to open HWRCs successfully?
We took advice from everybody, so we read the Veolia guide. We looked at the Nordo guide, we looked at the DEFRA. We did a lot of work inputting into DEFRA to help them. Obviously, we published our own, so it's super important, and we went to, I think, to a far bigger level of detail because it's relevant. We're trying to provide something that gives our site staff and our customers some insight to how you might approach the topic. And the sites are very individual, the contracts are very individual, and the sensitivities of the customers and the clients are very individual. So I think there was a rash of guidance. I think Eunovia put out a blog that talked about all the different guides. But I'd rather have more than less. So we welcomed everybody's advice.
Very good. And hopefully the customers that are going to speak next will tell us where they sought guidance from. So first up, good morning, David Taylor from Greater Manchester Combined Authority. How are you? And tell us about your experiences, both in terms of the thought process behind reopening, and then what have you actually done to make sure the sites are safe and sound, and what's the experience with the public?
Right, morning Adam, morning everybody. So if I could just move on to the next slide, please. What I'd like to do really is just give you some reflections on our experiences over the last 6 or 7 weeks. So by way of background, GMCA, we operate 20 recycling centres across Greater Manchester. in 9 of the 10 districts. The 10th is Wigan. They're a unitary authority, so I won't talk any more about them. They look after themselves. And these sites are extremely busy. They're dealing with around 300,000 tonnes of waste per year. We get about 6 million site visits over the course of a 12-month period. Now, if I look back just prior to lockdown, weekend of the 21st, 22nd of March, there was a huge amount of activity across these sites. A lot of that was fueled by speculation in the media about an impending withdrawal of collection services because of COVID, lack of staff. And you could see that that caused a degree of panic out there, with people then suddenly wanting to get rid of any waste prior to any lockdown restrictions being put in place. So as you can see, over the course of a weekend, the orange bars on the graph here, we had a total of just under 46,500 visits over the course of a 2-day period. Busiest sites heading towards 3,500 car visits through one individual site. Now, what we also had was a complete and utter disregard for social distancing going on, people almost pushing each other out of the way to get material into skips, and that just was not a sustainable position. So we were in discussion with Suez on the following morning about what do we do about this, and then the Prime Minister made an announcement on the 23rd of March, which effectively resulted in all of these sites being closed. Our view being that a trip to the HWRC did not fit within the guidance around what constituted an essential reason to be out of the house. So next slide, please. So if you start to look at the timeline here, 23rd of March, obviously that announcement came from central government. We then closed the sites. Almost immediately, we were coming under political pressure to justify this decision. Why had the sites closed? Now, to me, it seemed quite logical. You don't go there to shop, you don't go there to exercise, you don't go there for healthcare, and you don't go there to buy medicine. So that seemed a fairly straightforward interpretation. What we then started to get over the subsequent week or so were a lot of reference to increasing in fly tipping. Now, none of that was actually substantiated. I think a lot of this is generated by the fact more people were potentially out walking, potentially reporting more incidents of fly tipping, but whether they actually increased or not remains to be seen. We did have some impact upon our collection services through this period, but what I will say is throughout, a full residual waste collection service was provided by all 9 collection authorities. We then got into early April, and DEFRA decided to throw their thoughts into the mix, repeating and issuing some guidance, which started to indicate that their view was sites could be opened. And they then followed that up a week later with a media statement, which really then ramped up the pressure on us to start to consider reopening the sites. So working with Suez, we went through a process to look at, do we go with all of the sites? Do we go with all commodities? How do we actually do this? And that resulted in an options appraisal and then reopening on a very restricted basis, back to residual waste only from the 2nd of May with appropriate social distancing measures in place. We then wanted to see how that worked. And then as of this weekend, we've expanded commodities out to garden waste, wood, card, and a more wider definition of residual waste. It doesn't have to be just bagged material. So if I could have the next slide, please. So the considerations we've had to go through, clearly social distancing and control measures on sites, there to protect the staff, there to protect site users. But what that automatically does is it cuts down the vehicle throughput you can get through those sites, which then leads you on to what's the impact on the public highway. So that's where we've worked with the districts and also with GMP, Greater Manchester Police, and have developed site-specific traffic management plans for each of our facilities. The other consideration has been about staff resources. So I've had some impact upon the operational team because of COVID-related self-isolation or people being in vulnerable groups, and also availability of outlets for materials. So all of those factors came together in us coming to a conclusion that we would open on a limited basis Not all sites are open 7 days a week. Some are weekend only, some are Monday to Friday. And also looking at that reduced range of commodities. The other side of this is we looked at demand management. People were saying to us, put a booking system in place. Well, that's all very well, but when you've got 2 million residents and we're being asked to put an IT system together that won't fail in the first 5 minutes, it's not something you can do at 10 days notice. So our view was we would use vehicle registrations and have an allocation system based on an odd or an even registration number, do a lot of comms around that, and then be largely reliant upon members of the public to use their sense and actually comply with it, which was a leap of faith at this point in time. So next slide, please. So if you look at this is a typical site that we have. So where you can see the red crosses, that will be all of the small recyclable commodities, waste electrical items, gas bottles, and so on. So those were all closed off. That gave us queuing areas on site. And you can see the holding release points on the right-hand side is really that first point where cars were being stopped. They were then being allowed to flow through into the tipping area, and we had a bulky and a residual skip for each vehicle, coned off allocated bays. And that worked pretty well at keeping people separated. It was well respected. And what we also found is that the vehicle registration system, 95% of people turning up were on the right day for their vehicle. So the comms around this worked really well.
Very good.
Doing this, what you inevitably end up with is potential for queuing off site. So if we have a look at the next slide, please. So this is typical traffic management plan. So our site is just next to the blue line that you can see coming off the A6 Salford Road. That blue line is actually an access road to one of our other facilities. So we were able to use that to queue traffic off-site. But then the highways team developed a queuing lane, which is the yellow area in the middle of the A6 there, which enabled vehicles from either direction to be queued. And they then had a trigger point where if the queue reached a certain level, which effectively is the junction of the yellow and the pink line, that's the point at which people would start to be turned away from the site. So this kind of approach was taken at all of the facilities. We had traffic marshals out on the highway and also enforcement teams out there as well, managing the flow of traffic through the facilities. Next slide, please. So when I look at the reopening, the black bars are the weekends, the green is the Friday the 8th, which was the bank holiday. And what you can see is opening weekend, the total number of visits there was less than 15,000. So you compare that to the 46 we had pre-lockdown. So what that said to me, firstly, I suspect the demand was not quite what people were making it out to be for the facilities. Secondly, I think the vehicle number plate system helped to reduce that. The reduced range of commodities definitely decreased the demand on the sites. And then I also think that at this point in time, there was a conscious decision by members of the public, this is not an essential journey, I don't need to leave home. And as you can see, during the week, the blue dropped right down. And then we have the second weekend, which was also the bank holiday weekend. We were expecting more people to be out then. It was actually less. And then on the lower end of the graph, you can see the black bar there. That's for this Saturday. So we did actually see a significant increase there, which coincides with relaxation of lockdown and also the expansion of the commodities. I haven't got the Sunday figures, unfortunately, but I think they are roughly the same. So we're looking at about 20,000 visits over the course of this weekend just gone. Personal view is I think now we've rolled out those main commodities, that's the kind of level that we will be operating at, and I don't expect another surge in numbers. So I think that's my last slide. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. That new norm's quite an interesting one, isn't it? So quick question for you before we switch Helen on to the next slide, please. Those residents that did come on the wrong day, were they turned away in the queue?
The only time that we turned them away is if there was actually a queue which was starting to build up near to the trigger points within the traffic management plan. If the queue was at a low level or it was manageable, they were allowed to come through.
Good. And a second question for you, a quick one. It looks like considerable additional resource has been required to make this possible. Is that the case?
Absolutely. So we've got 20 sites across 9 districts, and the districts themselves have either provided staff, mainly from their parking enforcement teams, who aren't actually out enforcing parking at the moment, to act as traffic marshals. And in 2 or 3 cases, the districts have brought in external resource.
And what steps have you introduced to enable you to accept those additional material streams in the last week? What's changed?
It's been really looking at the configuration of the bays on site, and rather than having a single car in a coned off area, you've now got 2 vehicles within an area. In the same way, effectively, we took the analysis that if you go to Tesco's, you can park side by side with someone else. There isn't a control measure there. And that's enabled you to get more vehicles through, but still maintain social distancing.
Fabulous. Excellent insights. Thank you, David. We'll come back to you after the other 2 guest speakers. So next up's Richard from Surrey. Welcome, Richard. What's been happening in the south of the country?
Good morning. Yes, you're going to have to put on my face, I'm afraid, because I don't have any slides. But I suppose just by way of background is that our collection services, our districts and boroughs, did a sterling job during the period when the HWRCs were closed, and those services held up really well. In fact, they collected 60% more green waste than they would normally collect. They collected about 20% more residual waste and about 10% more food waste. So one of the things we were keen to do is support those services. So one of the districts had to drop its green waste collection service. So Suez got a couple of their drivers to work with them, got it up and running again. So that really took the pressure off the household waste sites being closed. So when we reopened our household waste sites on the 11th of May, we were expecting an absolute onslaught. We'd kind of prepared ourselves very well. Very similar to David, we had a two bin solution, a single bay, car bay, and a 2-bin solution for green waste and for residual waste. And on the Monday we reopened, we had some quite lengthy queues outside some of the sites. We had traffic marshals in operation to work those queues. But by midday or mid-morning, midday, those queues had dispersed. And that's been the pattern really for the rest of the week. We've not really seen a great deal of traffic into our sites. Now, we're not quite sure why. I think that's partly is that people are reticent to have come out still. I think people are still a bit worried about making those visits. Partly, I think, is that our curbside collection services has held up so well that, you know, we've not seen those types of waste needed at the household waste recycling centres. But yeah, I mean, we've been very pleased, but now we need to move to the next phase. So, you know, we're just about to discuss that with Suez, you know, how we're going to move to the next phase. I think there's this pressure to move to a nearly full operating system as soon as possible, really. Certainly politically, we're getting quite a lot of pressure to do that. So that's what we're going to work to try and do. Like David, we've not really seen any fly tipping issues. I think that was blown up by the media. There were a couple of big commercial fly tips, nothing to do with the household waste sites being closed. I suspect more to do with the fact that the commercial market was in a bit of a doldrums. Yeah, I think, you know, the nicest thing really is the public have been really, really good, you know, and the feedback to the people on site, the workers on site has been excellent. And most people have been compliant, bringing the right types of waste. I think we had about 90% compliance. You know, so actually, you know, it's a bit of a relief. Week 1, we got away with it. So, you know, we need to continue.
Is that level of compliance more than you're seeing usually on your curbside?
Yes, I think so. Although, you know, I think what we're seeing, we've seen some contamination of the DMR, quite a bit of contamination of curbside DMR, I think. I mean, just in terms of volumes of material, but yeah, no, it's we've been really pleased.
And are you sending people home with stuff that's non-compliant or non-target, or what are you doing?
Yeah, we're sending people away, and generally, I think people have been okay about that. So we've not really experienced too many issues at the site.
And quick question for both you and David, whilst we switch on to Dale, who's the next speaker. Residential feedback when you had a non-compliant material or somebody's in the queue and shouldn't have been. Any aggro, any difficulties, or were people generally accepting that we live in interesting times? David, perhaps first.
The vast majority took that approach. We did also have a policy where we restricted access to cars and small vans only. So we've got a 2-meter height barrier, so you can get a transit van under there. Any large vans were turned away. We had a couple of those who decided to try and blockade the sites and stage a one-man protest, and a little bit of abuse to site staff. But in all cases, the police attended, took their details, moved them on. So we did have good support from the police as well. But for the most part, most people have been accepting it's not business as usual and they need to comply with the rules.
And Richard, in your case?
Yeah, very, very similar picture actually. 1 or 2 issues. We didn't accept any vans or trailers at all, and actually they were turned away before they got to the site by the traffic marshals, where the traffic marshals were. So I think that avoided them being stuck in a queue and being turned away later. But as I say, there wasn't much of a queue, so I think that it wasn't an issue because they hadn't queued for ages.
And David's already explained that why they didn't go with an electronic booking system. David, Richard, did you consider one of those, or did you not deem it necessary?
Yeah, we certainly considered it, but I think for the same reasons as David, we just didn't think it was feasible in the time period available. But it's certainly something we're looking at for phase 2 based on others' experience. And I think, Stuart, you mentioned that earlier. I think, well, why don't we use that anyway? Because we don't really use the resources efficiently. If it's a wet weekend, no one turns up, we've got all the resources lined up to deal with waste, and they're sitting there. And a busy weekend, there's probably not enough resources. So it actually makes you think, actually aligning our demand and supply is probably a good thing to do.
And Richard, briefly, finally, you mentioned phase 2. When do you think phase 2 might be in terms of additional materials or letting in vans, etc.?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm sure my cabinet member's listening, actually, so I'll have to be careful. But I think there is a desire, I think, to move really by the end of this month to a phase 2. Whether that's deliverable or not, I don't know. We need to have a discussion with Suez about that, and we need to think about whether we can introduce a booking system in readiness for phase 2. But there's a lot of political pressure.
I'm sure, and that's a perfect segue for Dale from Stockton, who actually is using a booking system, amongst other things. So Dale, welcome, and what's been going on in Stockton over the last few weeks?
Thanks, Adam. We listening to Dave and Richard, we were in a very, very similar position. We needed to open the facility. Stockton was in quite a unique position where we actually share our household waste site with our neighbouring authority, Unitary Authority Middlesbrough. So it services over 150,000 households, not to the levels that obviously Manchester are looking at, but when you're looking at one facility for those 2 unitary authorities, it does get quite busy. We also, on the same facility, if you want to go to the picture, Helen, we do have our energy from waste facilities there. We've got the deliveries for the Tees Valley Councils. We've got the deliveries for Northumberland, the South Tyne and Weir Partnership. There's a lot of refuse and Arctic vehicles that actually go into that facility. And in our little very high-tech blue column on the left-hand side, that's Stockton and Middlesbrough's household waste site. So you can see from the roundabout, that is the one entry road for all of the energy from waste deliveries, all of the residents accessing the facility. It can become quite an issue. We had historic information around the bank holiday queues that we see, where they can reach one of our major network roads, the A19, which is a couple of miles just down from the site. So we knew when we were opening this facility, we had a number of concerns that we had to deal with. We also needed to work with Suez quite closely on ensuring that when they opened the facility, that the social distancing on site was able to be maintained, because that was one of the reasons why we closed the site initially. As David mentioned, we had a lot of people coming to the facility. We were unable to control that traffic, and people on site were crossing quite regularly. So we closed the facility, and then we that was sort of the 20th, I think it was, of March, and we had an internal discussion where we were looking at the 3rd of May as a potential opening time, which was the Sunday. But that was only sort of 10 days before that we decided to look at this potential date. We worked with Suez on what outlets were available to receive the materials. That was one of the first steps that we needed to look at to understand what we could accept from the public and what we couldn't accept. We also needed to understand what the issues were about once they were on site, how we were able to segregate depending on what materials were open. We had a number of options for that. But our main concern was the impact of queues on this facility with our normal refuse collection deliveries. We were already quite stretched. We were looking at social distancing on the crews by shuttling drivers and shuttling loaders around on our unused community transport minibuses. So we needed to try and understand how that would play out, so that they had a free run basically at getting to the tipping floor. We from that we decided that we'd need to look at some form of booking system, and although we have a very basic booking system for our bulky waste, we needed to look at something slightly different where we could block them down to half-hour slots. So we came up with we put a challenge to our ICT basically and said, right, this is what we want. We want a booking system for the residents. We want half-an-hour slots where we can limit the numbers and we can control those actually accessing the facility based on postcode. We sent that through on the Monday night, and on the Tuesday morning our ICT came up with a system which wasn't an internal system, but it was something that we were able to look at from an external provider. We played about with it for a few days, and on the Thursday afternoon we were in a position to actually launch the booking system. We spoke with Suez, ensured that we were able to open. We were able to open for all materials on site because our outlets were all available. And through this booking system, we were able to minimise the numbers of residents coming through. At this stage, Middlesbrough and Stockton look at a very, very small number, so we're limiting to 20 vehicles every half an hour. That was our first point of call, and like David mentioned, we were kind of almost hoping that once we communicated this message through our social media platform, we were hoping that residents were going to follow the rules and make a booking, turn up with their ID, ensure that there was no vans or trailers, and they needed to do that. We opened the facility at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, Sunday the 3rd, and I was on site, very, very cautious, trying to be positive, but not really knowing what to expect. And if you want to go to the next slide, Helen, the picture that you will see on the left-hand side was taken at 4 minutes past 8, and we had 3 cars that just hadn't managed to get in from the queue. One of the things that we did look at the first week of opening was we had 4 enforcement officers on site just to check the ID, to ensure that they were able to assist Suez with the throughput, and if there was any concerns around people coming without a booking, or somebody coming with the that basically tried to use a Stockton postcode but was coming from a neighbouring authority, then we were able to turn them away. We had no issues whatsoever. We had a small number of vehicles that we needed to turn away for not having a booking, around 10:30. But other than that, it went very, very well. Better than I even hoped it might have gone at the time. And myself and my colleague were on site. After about 20 minutes, it was almost a case of thinking, well, what are we still here for? Everything seems to be working. The residents were in and out. We got plenty of thumbs up, where residents were quite, and I think Stuart mentioned it when he spoke earlier, they're actually preferring this method because they know when they're actually going to be able to get into the site. They know there'll be no queues for them. It's a quick turnaround, and we're now looking at what the next levels of rolling out the service is going to be for the foreseeable future, where we can just add a few more probably once to the system that we're using. And the final picture on the right hand side was taken this morning at 8:30, where Suez are obviously running this facility now on their own without any assistance from the enforcement team, and our refuse vehicles are not impacted. We've got no problems whatsoever with queues, and like I say, it's something that's been a real positive, and it's just one of those ones which it's taken this situation to come up with a system that we might look to use on very busy weekends in future, if not all the time.
Wow, thank you. Wow. Absolutely fascinating, and all three of you, I mean, so much great success in what's been a very rapid turnaround from having no sites open to having many sites open, taking multiple waste streams. So well done. Helen, can we get up the first poll? Stuart, though, in the meantime, very interested question here. Do Suez, I think you have to answer this, not me, do Suez think that the Scottish Government are being overcautious in not allowing HWRCs to open just now?
So I think it's a little like the schools debate. I think you have to look at the local issue. You know, although infection rates are declining in some parts of the country, in other parts they're still climbing. So you have to look at it on a local basis, and the messaging. They are more precautionary than the English government. I think the experience we've had on the sites that we've opened suggests that you can do it, and you can do it in a safe way, and one that the customers appreciate, be it odd and even number plates, or be it booking systems or whatever system. I think working and communicating to the public, you can do it. So I think although they're being more precautionary, they should have confidence from what we've seen in England in opening and how that's managed, and to a degree, the majority of the customers that have attended have followed the rules and want to follow the rules. So I think that we shouldn't ignore the fact that actually the customers to the sites are helping us as well, and are working with us in the majority of cases.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to a couple of poll questions now. Let's get the audience involved. This one's been on the screen for a little while, but only 30% of you have voted. So this is for everybody that's dialed in. Which services have you re-established or plan to re-establish in the next week or two? Now, obviously, if you're not a local authority, it might be hard to answer this, so I accept you will opt out. But garden waste collection services, bulky waste collection service, HWRC or other. We're going to count you down because we're still at only 35%. So let's count you down. 10. You know what happens. In the meantime, Dale, question for you. Have you had lots of complaints about residents not being able to book a slot? I'm still counting down the rest of you. 5, 4, etc. Dale?
Not really. I mean, we have introduced additional slots where we can. So at this stage, when we first opened, we kept out an hour slot. When we knew our main refuse deliveries were available, we're needing to access the facility. We needed to do that before opening to ensure that everything worked as we planned. So we were able to kind of slowly introduce additional numbers here and there. We've increased numbers on a weekend and after 4 o'clock from 20 to 30, which is assisting with those bookings. And like I say, we're constantly looking at introducing additional bookings where we can, mainly around those sort of refuse delivery times where we know that we're now okay and we can continue to give the residents additional blocks.
Thank you. There we go. Stuart, go on. Seeing as you talked about service uptake in recent history, how do you feel about the result? 82% re-establishing HWRCs in the next week or so, and then quite a drop down to garden, bulky, and other. And apologies for not having a non. You're absolutely right. We should have had a non because we've got them all open already.
So I think HWRCs are probably the most visible service, and the one that is publicly the one that's most desired. So no surprise there, and kind of reflects our own experience. I think garden is on a gradual increase, and you can see from the previous slide I did, adapt slides, that's on the increase anyway, and he's kind of being matched to resources. So as resources come back online and self-isolation reduces, helped by the ability to get testing for the key workers, we'll see that go on, and I think the same as bulky will follow on. So yes, exactly as I expected it to happen.
Thank you. Let's go straight into poll 2, and I'm going to come to Richard, after this, so be prepared. I'd like a comment. Simple one. It's a yes or no. Are you seeing challenges to maintaining ongoing services? So you take your pick, audience. What are those ongoing services? But are you seeing challenges to those? Yes or no? And this is, I'm not giving you 2 minutes for this one. We're way running over time. Come on, let's count you down. 10, 8, etc., etc. Quick question. Dale, did you give residents an option to call back to call to book slots, or must they have internet access?
No, this was something that we needed to discuss with our customer service team. They were very concerned that the demand would outstretch the ability for them to control it. So all bookings are currently made online. We haven't had, and I was discussing this with a colleague the other day, we haven't had any queries from residents being unable to book using the online system. So whether or not family members are booking on their behalf, I'm not sure, but we are getting a lot of people using the facility, and we've had no concerns on that.
Super. There you go, Richard. Close. What do you reckon? How does that fit with what's happening in Surrey?
Yeah, I mean, our districts actually have done really well. I mean, one of the challenges we've had is that we were able to maintain the disposal end, if you like, because the HWRCs have been closed. So we've got spare capacity at the transfer stations, and like Dale, we have a number of shared accesses, so that causes all sorts of problems. But actually, in Surrey, the collection services are really holding up well. So I would say yes is probably higher in Surrey.
Okay, and let's go straight into number 3, because this is a clarification around that last answer. Only those of you that voted yes, you're seeing challenges. So is that a result of composition change, volume change, reallocation, or lack of staff, which we've certainly seen discussed quite a bit on webinars in recent months? The supply chain, it may be offtake markets, etc., or other. So I'm only expecting half of the audience to vote on this one, because only half of them said it was a problem last time. So let's count you down. In the meantime, question, Greater Manchester, what PPE have colleagues recommended for staff, and are staff complying? David.
So staff on the sites, when we reopened, they were being kept well away from any members of the public. So it was the standard PPE, safety footwear, gloves, high-vis, hard hat, and safety eyewear. When we move to the next stage, where we will be relaxing some of the parking restrictions and also expanding the range of commodities, then my understanding is that Suez will be providing face visors for the operatives who are intermingling with members of the public.
And is that any different, Dale or Richard?
No, very similar in Surrey. I think they're keeping the staff well away, and those who have interaction will either have a visor or a face mask, I think. But generally, we discourage that. Okay,
Stuart, here we go. You can answer this poll. There's a bit of a mix in here in terms of why are those a challenge. Bit composition, mainly volume changes, reallocation of staff being the number one, and then supply chain and other layers. Is that reflecting what we're seeing?
Yeah, no, I think lack of staff. We've seen less so ourselves, I think, in many cases, but reallocation or prioritisation of staff, and as has been mentioned, some of the activities involve more staff than they would normally do. So it's not always about being ill or self-isolation. Sometimes it's about priority and new services or change services requiring support. I think volume changes, yes, we've seen that more in municipal. So you can see some of the customers looking to address that by different collection methods or return visits and things like that to cope as the vehicles are filling up more frequently than before. So kind of a more agile route planning.
Thank you, Dale. You're very popular this morning. So what's the current lead time for booking?
I think it's probably about 10 days. We've opened the booking for 21 days in advance. One of the settings you can pick and choose when residents book in advance. So we're probably looking at maybe 10 to 14 days. But like I say, we're constantly looking at reintroducing more numbers, and that might change very, very shortly.
And did you do a quality impact assessment before you instigated the booking system, simply because there are people without internet access or skills or poor English, etc.?
Yeah, we needed to. I mean, we've looked into. We needed to look into all of these, and I think one of the real pressures that we had was we knew that we needed to open it in some form safely. So we needed to sort of try and do that the best way possible and reach as many people as possible. Like I say, we're looking this afternoon, hopefully, to try and sort of advance from that and give people more options and give more numbers and try and make it a little bit more user friendly.
I think what all of you have suggested is it's kind of there's a journey here, isn't there? You can't get everything open for everybody on day one, and it's a question of let's make some progress and then learn lessons, as Richard said, and look at what others are doing and go, okay, we could maybe use that approach. So, quick question then: are any of your sites, all three of you, offering reuse segregation currently? David?
No,
Richard?
not yet.
No.
Dale? No.
Yep.
Anybody planning to in the next phase?
No.
No.
No. No.
No.
Not
Okay.
at the moment.
Well, that was quick. Right. Next poll, please, Helen. While I ask a question of, oh, that's not. Let's just ask the poll question. This is much more interesting. So, if you've opened your HWRCs recently, and many of you clearly have, what issues are you currently facing? I want real issues, not perceived issues. So, have you got more queues? Have you got social distancing issues in terms of the operations? Is it because you're not taking certain materials? Is it because people are turning up and need help and you can't give them the help? Or is there something else that we've missed? Please identify. So again, vote as many of you as possible that have got a role in opening these sites, whether you're a contractor or a local authority. I think this will be valid. Count you down, please. You know, I want to see those fingers. Trigger fingers, please. 5, 4. You know what's coming next. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Dale, how does this look to you? So we've got queuing 53%, so that's the dominant one. 44% commenting on only taking certain materials, and then the other 3 really weren't that common in terms of feedback. How does that feel, given you've been open for quite a while now?
I suppose the 2 main ones are the ones that we really haven't faced. We haven't had queues, and we've been able to open flow materials. So I suppose it's a difficult one for us. I think social distancing was our main concern, and being able to allow the residents to use the facility safely while also protecting the staff. So from our point of view, those were issues that we tried to resolve before opening.
And for Richard and David, any issues with the van ban or transit van ban or whatever it might be? Is that one of those others perhaps?
It is. I think it's, again, the use of the traffic marshals to weed those vehicles out of the queue before they get to the site is solving the problem, and it's removing the confrontation from site staff at the gate. And that would be my recommendation for anybody that's looking at that kind of system.
Richard, anything else?
Yeah, no, in a similar way, I think we've got to work out how we reintroduce fans, but at the moment, it's not an issue, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. Right, here we go. Number 5. There's only 2 more polls to go, so the audience, your fingers shouldn't be too tired. For those that have opened some or all of their HWRCs or are planning to in the near future, have you implemented flow control? It's a simple yes or no. And in the meantime, quick comment from one of our audience, shan't be named, but the biggest issue has been the queue length online. It took her 17 hours to book a slot for an authority somewhere in the southeast of England, shan't be named, but it's none of those that are speaking today. That's shocking. So let's count you down, because this is a very simple yes or no. Come on, get those votes going. Is there much electrical waste coming into Stockton, Dale?
There's a mix of all waste. Yeah, that was one of the key areas that we needed to check as an outlet prior to opening. We're seeing quite a mix, mainly around cardboard, green waste, and wood. But of the other materials, there's quite a lot of electrical items coming through. I think there's plenty of garage clearances going on at the moment.
All these people at home. So Stuart, there we go. Number 5. That's not unexpected, is it?
It's an obvious one. I think everyone's been conscious that social distancing in queues were always a risk, and therefore management of crew. And you can see very different methods from kind of postcode restriction to odd and even registration numbers and booking. And I think everyone's chosen a system that seems to, certainly from what's been reported today in our own experience, has generally worked for the local customers. We've not experienced some of the reported long queues that other sites have seen.
And while this poll's on, there you go, audience. It's your last one, so make it a good one. What materials have you or are you planning to open for? So select all that apply in this case. We're keen to understand whether you're going back to almost normal or you know, that first stage that you've heard from each of the speakers to date. So you can vote as normal. Multiple answers are allowed. Why do you think there have been huge queuing at some authorities? Clearly none of the three that have spoken today, but you know, Stuart, from your perspective, looking at that, you know, that UK-wide issue, is there something we can learn looking at some of those authorities?
So obviously, as slightly second-hand knowledge, but I think for us, and certainly from picking up from what's been said here and what we've seen from our other customers, is communication. Don't lift expectations, so manage the expectations, constrain it and then expand it, I think is a good service in terms of limit the expectations first, see how it goes, and if you can do, then expand the service. And then kind of return to normal in a graduated manner. And maybe the expectations or the communications was lacking, and therefore lots of people turned up to try and do things that they either couldn't do or couldn't manage the traffic. So I think maybe there's some exercise in just managing expectation and managing what can be brought to the site originally.
Well, you said that in your slide deck some 45 minutes ago, so there you go, premonition. So go on, tell me about the final set of results, Stuart. Not unexpected, really, is it, in terms of black bag and garden being your primary material streams that need to be reopened or expected to be opened?
Yeah, I think phase two's coming through. Residual is the one that has most health impact at held at home, so that should be the one that provides that first overstop. Garden's probably the frustration one, as is bulky, as we're not really doing the curbside bulky, but if we can get that service back, then you'd hope that we could return to our more curbsides for that, because that keeps people at home. I think we've seen some supply chain requirements for if you get it going. So again, it's the system as a whole getting back to normal. So yeah, no, that's recognised for phase two, so I think that's good.
Thank you. Thank you again to the audience. Fantastic level of engagement with the polls. Always appreciate your honesty and your anonymity. So here we go for the panel. I'm going to pick one or two of you at a time. So Richard, what was this dude protesting about when he turned up? It was your site, wasn't it?
Oh, we've had a couple.
And what was their pet problem?
Oh, okay. Well, we had we had some bees on the site. I don't know if that's a pet problem, but we had a swarm of bees that congregate on one site. There was a chap who turned up with 2 builders bags full of garden waste, and then complained when he didn't get any help. You know, I guess but generally, I think you know, apart from people turning up with a bit of the wrong waste, it's been relatively quiet, I think.
Good. Okay, so here we go. In terms of future contingency planning, let's pick a few of you for this one. Get ready. Should the government deem it necessary to return to lockdown, either nationally or perhaps regionally, would the panelists argue that HWRC should be kept open, given the new infection risk control measures that are in place? So, do you think are you confident you could stay open should a lockdown come, and should we be lobbying government to stay open under those circumstances? Let's go, David first.
I think, could we operate safely? Yes, we could. Is it the right thing from a public health perspective to prevent transfer of infection? I would question that.
Thank you. And Dale?
I think, again, like what David just said there, we probably could stay open. Whether or not we would, depending on what the level of the guidance, if there was a change stated. One of the things I was always quite keen on, DEFRA discussed the fact that they believe the site should be open, albeit there was non-essential travel restrictions in place. That wasn't something that I was going to make a decision on. If a resident wanted to make a non-essential travel, that was their decision. We were instructed to open the facility. I wasn't going to get into whether or not they should have driven out the house or not. That was something that that was more for the police. But again, it would depend on the guidance and the level of impact of where we were.
So on that point, on the law change, were any of you concerned that the wording in the Act was somewhat blunt, didn't necessarily reflect the essential nature of the visit, as you've just said, Dale? You know, people were suddenly coming with anything they wanted. Did we do enough to give DEFRA a steer on this, that, you know, opening the doors was going to, you know, add complexity and uncertainty to the system? Stuart, let's start with you, because I know we've been talking to DEFRA about this.
So we wanted, with our second document, a bit more specific. You know, what's essential DIY? For me, none of it is, because I hate DIY. But so we try to explain that if you're repairing, heating the house, or you're making it safe, or you're making it secure, then, you know, there's some definition around what essential is. And I think to manage that expectation and to just give people the confidence that what they're doing could be, you know, I'd hate people not to do DIY that would make their house, you know, safe and secure, because they feared it not. It's a little like the NHS wanting people that have got other injuries that aren't COVID related or illnesses still come forward. So, you know, it's about providing that essential service. So we gave DEFRA that lesson and said, no, we thought they should be more deterministic in their guidance and in the kind of what do they mean by some of these terms, because I think leaving it to interpretation can lead to frustrations between different authorities or sites taking slightly different views. And I think, as all the panelists have said, the thing that we've all tried to do is avoid frustration, because frustration leads to unintended consequences. And if we can keep people happy and know what they want to do and communicate properly, then that gives them a good understanding of what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing.
Quick yes or no for all of you. Are you seeing PPE contamination at your sites or at your curbside collection systems? Start with David.
Not through the household waste recycling centres, but we are picking it up, particularly in our newspaper and card stream. Seem to be getting a lot of masks and gloves coming through that, whether that is healthcare professionals visiting people at home and then not knowing which wheelie bin to put materials in, I don't know, but it is definitely something which is on the increase.
Richard?
Not that I'm aware of, but you know, it's early days. Yeah.
And Dale?
Yeah, no, we haven't seen it. It could be in the refuse stream, but it's not coming in the household waste site or in the recycling.
That's positive, because if you believe some of the media, you think this was you know, prevalent everywhere. Right, I'm conscious of time. We've still got a very engaged audience. There's a few more questions coming in, but I want to ask you each for a takeaway message. What has surprised you the most out of this crisis? So not necessarily HWRCs, just generally the last 10 weeks. What has surprised you the most? Let's go Dale first.
I suppose it's been the ability to work differently and the speed of what that has happened. I mean, as another example, Stockton are currently still operating a we've reintroduced a green waste service, albeit on a monthly weekend basis. So we're not having the number of people in the depot or out and about in the streets during the normal working week. We've moved that over to a weekend collection. That seems to be working. Utilising transporting community transport vehicles to move people around. So yeah, the ability to kind of almost make these changes and roll them out very, very quickly has probably been the thing that's been, from my side of things, the most positive. I like making changes.
Richard, anything else?
I think the most pleasing thing is in terms of the way that districts and the boroughs and the county council have worked together to maintain services. You know, it's a bit like a sort of wartime spirit, but no, it's worked really, really well through their partnership. So, you know, long may that continue.
And David, finally.
Two things for me. I think on the HWRCs, the issue of closing them is how absolutely divisive that decision has been, with people really not understanding why you would want to close them, and those very firmly on the side of it's not an essential journey, and the bigger public health problem out there is COVID-19, not some alleged fly tipping. So I think that's one side of it, and the other side is the fundamental change in behaviour that we've seen. If you go back to those figures from 21st, 22nd of March, and people still at that point not understanding the gravity of the situation, still wanting to be out, still wanting to use sites when they wanted, how they wanted, where they wanted, to where we are now. And you can see that there is a realization, an acceptance of the situation, and understanding that this is not normal, and people adapting to it. And I think that clearly comes through in the figures that are there.
Thank you. So Stuart, almost the final word with you. What surprised you about the last 10 weeks or so?
I think picking up a little bit is the householder and others' attitude to work with us. You know, we're making dynamic changes to services. We're having to chop and change a little bit. We're having to move things around and make different provision. And actually, in the majority, they've worked with us and have cooperated. And I think, to me, it was a surprise when we see, you know, disturbance, service changes, and you kind of get an impression of change. But actually, the householders and others have been as agile as we have, I think, and it's been a real pleasure and surprise. And
a surprise, yes. So just last minute with me. Absolutely fantastic session. Thoroughly enjoyed it. The four of you have been excellent. Great insights and some honesty, which is always welcome. So thank you, David, Richard, Dale, and of course Stuart. Audience, you've been awesome. Levels of engagement, excellent as always. Questions, well, I've had pages of them, so thank you very much. Always a pleasure to help answer some of those. Takeaway messages: we have a new norm in Greater Manchester anyway. Surrey looks like it's sleepy. Flexibility and cooperation have been key in the last 10 weeks, and our level of public engagement has never been so good, and we need to maintain that. There will be future Suez webinars on topics related to all things COVID, and possibly things not related to COVID over the summer, whilst we're still adapting to the new norm and still probably working from home or socially isolating to some degree. So we look forward to seeing you at those events. In the meantime, we will be circulating web links so that you can download and listen to this again. We will be publishing the results, and there's been 200 of you voting today, so thank you very much for that. And there will be a blog in the near future summarising just some of the key messages and lessons as we continue on our journey of providing frontline services to the public during COVID-19. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've been Dr. Adam Reed of Suez. Thank you, and have a good Monday. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.